January 4th, 1944, San Francisco. A woman's body is found in a bathtub. Her name is Jean Tatlock, 29 years old, a psychiatrist. The official cause of death, suicide by drowning, case closed. Except for one problem. The FBI had agents watching her apartment that night. They were surveilling her because of her relationship with a man working on the most classified project in American history, a man who would, 18 months later, detonate the first atomic bomb and change the world forever. His name was J. Robert Oppenheimer. And here's what they don't tell you. Jean Tatlock's body was positioned wrong. The amount of barbiturates in her system didn't match a typical suicide. There was no note, and the FBI's surveillance logs from that night have never been fully released. Was she murdered? And if so, by who? American intelligence trying to sever Oppenheimer's connection to a known communist? Or Soviet intelligence silencing someone who knew too much? We may never know, because 70 years later, files about Jean Tatlock's death remain classified. But her death is just one piece of a much larger mystery, a mystery involving Soviet spies, atomic secrets, a trial that destroyed America's most brilliant scientist, and documents that are still hidden today. Documents that might prove J. Robert Oppenheimer was either the greatest patriot of the 20th century or one of the most successful spies in history. This is the story they don't want you to know. The story of the man who became death, destroyer of worlds, and the secrets he took to his grave. Let me tell you what the history books get wrong. They'll tell you Oppenheimer was a brilliant physicist who led the Manhattan Project. They'll tell you he built the atomic bomb, then had moral regrets. They'll tell you he was caught up in McCarthy-era paranoia and his security clearance was unjustly revoked. That's the sanitized version, the version that's safe for documentaries and classrooms. But here's what actually happened, and I need you to pay attention to this because it gets disturbing fast. In the 1930s, Oppenheimer wasn't just sympathetic to communism. He was deeply embedded in communist networks. His brother was a party member. His girlfriend was a party member. His wife had been married to a communist who died fighting in the Spanish Civil War. His students, his colleagues, his entire social circle was crawling with communists. And not just casual communists. We're talking about people who would later be identified as Soviet intelligence operatives, people who were actively spying for Stalin. Now, Oppenheimer always claimed he never joined the Communist Party himself. He said he was just a fellow traveler, someone who sympathized but never formally joined. And technically, there's no document showing he signed a membership card. But here's the thing that should terrify you. In the 1990s, when Soviet archives were partially opened, researchers found references to a high-level American scientist, someone with extraordinary access to the Manhattan Project, someone who provided information that helped the Soviets build their own bomb years earlier than expected. The code name was partially redacted. The descriptions were vague, but the timing, the access level, the type of information provided, it all matched someone at Oppenheimer's level. Was it him? The files don't say, or rather, the parts that would say are still classified by both Russia and the United States. Why would the United States keep those files classified if Oppenheimer was innocent? That's the question that haunts this story. What are they still hiding? Let me take you back to July 16, 1945. The New Mexico desert, 5:29 in the morning. Oppenheimer is standing in a bunker watching the countdown for the world's first atomic bomb test. 10, 9, 8. Everything he's worked for, everything he's sacrificed for 3 years comes down to this moment. If the bomb works, the war ends, America wins. His name goes in the history books. If it fails, he's just another scientist who couldn't deliver. 3, 2, 1, 0. For a split second, nothing. And in that split second, Oppenheimer later said he thought it had failed. All of it, for nothing. Then the desert exploded into light brighter than 1,000 suns. The fireball rose into the sky. The shock wave hit the bunker, rattling the walls. The mushroom cloud climbed 40,000 feet in seconds, and Oppenheimer stood there, watching what he had created, and realized he had just opened a door to hell that could never be closed. A line from Hindu scripture came to his mind, from the Bhagavad Gita. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Everyone knows that quote. It's famous. But here's what people don't understand about it. That wasn't pride. That wasn't accomplishment. That was horror. Because Oppenheimer, in that moment, understood something the rest of the world wouldn't understand for years. He had just given humanity the power to end itself, and there was no taking it back. But here's the part that will make your blood run cold. By the time that bomb detonated in the New Mexico desert, Soviet spies had already stolen most of the secrets. Klaus Fuchs, a physicist working directly under Oppenheimer, had been passing detailed bomb designs to the Soviets for over a year. Theodore Hall, a 19-year-old prodigy, had volunteered to spy because he believed the Soviets deserved the bomb. David Greenglass, a machinist, was feeding information to his brother-in-law Julius Rosenberg. The Soviets knew the bomb designs, they knew the materials, they knew the detonation mechanisms, everything, and Oppenheimer was in charge of all of it. He had hired these people. He worked with them every day. He trusted them. Did he know? That's the question that destroyed his life. Did he know there were Soviet spies working under him? Did he suspect? Did he look the other way? Or was he one of them? Let me tell you about the night that changed everything. Late 1942 or early 1943. The exact date has never been confirmed. Oppenheimer is at his home in Berkeley, California. The Manhattan Project is just getting started. He's been put in charge, despite serious reservations from military intelligence about his communist connections. A friend comes to visit, a professor named Hakon Chevalier. They've known each other for years, good friends. They have drinks, they talk. And then Chevalier says something. He mentions that he's been approached by someone who could pass scientific information to the Soviet Union. He says this casually, like he's just sharing an interesting piece of gossip. Now, here's where the story gets weird. What happened next is one of the most disputed moments in Cold War history. Oppenheimer would tell multiple different versions of this conversation over the years, and each version contradicted the last. In his first version, told to security officials months later, Oppenheimer said that Chevalier had approached 3 different scientists about passing information to the Soviets. He didn't name the scientists. He said he'd heard about it through intermediaries. Security officials pressed him. Who were the 3 scientists? Who were the intermediaries? Give us names. Oppenheimer hesitated. Then he changed his story. He admitted he had lied. It wasn't 3 scientists. It was just him. Chevalier had approached him directly. But even this version had problems. The timeline didn't match. Details contradicted other evidence. Security officials became convinced that Oppenheimer was still hiding something. Under intense pressure, Oppenheimer gave a third version. He claimed Chevalier had been acting on behalf of a man named George Eltonton, a Soviet contact. He said he had immediately rejected the approach and told Chevalier it was treason. But he had waited months to report it. Why? And why had his story changed so many times? Years later, after Oppenheimer's career was destroyed, Chevalier would write that Oppenheimer had fabricated the entire story to protect them both. He claimed the conversation had been innocent, that Soviet espionage had barely been mentioned, and that Oppenheimer had exaggerated it when reporting to security officials to make himself look vigilant. So, what really happened that night? Did Chevalier try to recruit Oppenheimer as a spy? Did Oppenheimer seriously consider it? Did he agree and then panic and report a modified version to cover himself? Or was it all innocent? Just a conversation between friends that got blown out of proportion. The truth died with both men. But that conversation, that one night in 1942 or 1943, would become the centerpiece of the case against Oppenheimer. Evidence that he had lied to security officials, evidence that he couldn't be trusted, evidence that maybe, just maybe, he had been tempted by that approach and had done something he could never admit. Now let me tell you about the woman who died in the bathtub, Jean Tatlock, because her story is where this mystery gets truly dark. Oppenheimer met Jean Tatlock in the 1930s. She was brilliant, beautiful, and deeply committed to communism. She was a member of the Communist Party. She attended meetings. She was involved with people who were later confirmed to be Soviet intelligence operatives. And Oppenheimer fell desperately in love with her. They had an intense on-and-off relationship for years. Oppenheimer proposed marriage multiple times. She refused, struggling with depression and uncertainty about their future. Eventually, Oppenheimer married someone else, Catherine Pooning, in 1940. But he didn't stop seeing Jean Tatlock, even after he was married, even after he was running the Manhattan Project, even after the FBI was watching him. In June 1943, while Oppenheimer was supposed to be focused entirely on building the atomic bomb, he spent the night at Jean Tatlock's apartment in San Francisco. The FBI was surveilling him. They photographed him entering. They photographed him leaving the next morning. This was a massive security breach. Oppenheimer, the man in charge of America's most classified project, spending the night with a known communist who had connections to suspected Soviet agents. Military intelligence was furious. They wanted him removed from the project immediately. But General Leslie Groves, the military commander of the Manhattan Project, protected him. Groves believed Oppenheimer was too valuable to lose. He convinced security officials to let it go. 7 months later, Jean Tatlock was dead. January 4th, 1944. She was found in her bathtub in her San Francisco apartment. Her head was underwater. There were barbiturates in her system. The death was ruled a suicide. But the scene was wrong. Investigators who looked at the case noted that her body position didn't match a typical drowning suicide. The amount of drugs in her system was inconsistent. And most importantly, there was no suicide note. Jean Tatlock was a psychiatrist. She was articulate, thoughtful, and had attempted suicide before, if she had genuinely decided to end her life, she almost certainly would have left a note, an explanation, something. There was nothing, and here's the part that should chill you to the bone. The FBI had agents watching her apartment. They were conducting active surveillance on her because of her communist connections and her relationship with Oppenheimer. Were those agents there the night she died? The surveillance logs from that night have never been fully released. Parts of the file on Jean Tatlock's death remain classified to this day. Why? If it was a straightforward suicide, why would any files still be classified 80 years later? Some historians believe Jean Tatlock was murdered by Soviet intelligence, that she knew too much about their operations, that she was a liability, and that she was eliminated. The Soviets had done this before. They had a long history of killing people who became inconvenient. But others believe she was murdered by American intelligence, that the FBI or military intelligence decided she was too dangerous to Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project, that she was eliminated to protect the bomb program. Both theories are terrifying. Both theories suggest that a brilliant young woman was killed to keep secrets. And both theories are plausible, given what we know about intelligence operations during that era. The truth? Still classified. Jean Tatlock's death was closed as a suicide in 1944, and no serious criminal investigation has ever been reopened. But here's what we do know. After Jean Tatlock died, the security concerns about Oppenheimer decreased. The woman who represented his most problematic connection to communism was gone, and the Manhattan Project continued without that particular complication. Convenient, isn't it? Let's fast forward. August 1945. The war ends. The atomic bombs are dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrenders. Oppenheimer becomes a national hero, the man who won the war, the father of the atomic bomb. But behind the scenes, something terrifying is happening. American intelligence is discovering that the Soviets know far more about the bomb than they should. They're pursuing designs that match the American approach too closely. They're using methods and materials that they shouldn't have known about. There's been a leak, a massive security breach, and investigators are frantically trying to figure out who. In 1949, the Soviet Union tests its first atomic bomb. American intelligence is shocked. They had estimated it would take the Soviets at least a decade to develop a bomb. They did it in 4 years. How? The answer was spies, multiple spies, working at Los Alamos, passing information to Soviet intelligence throughout the war. Klaus Fuchs is arrested in 1950. He confesses to being a Soviet spy. He admits he passed detailed technical information about the plutonium bomb design, information that was critical to the Soviet program. The FBI tears apart the Manhattan Project, investigating everyone who worked there. They're looking for other spies, and they keep coming back to one name, J. Robert Oppenheimer. Because here's what they can't ignore. Fuchs worked under Oppenheimer. Theodore Hall worked under Oppenheimer. David Greenglass worked under Oppenheimer. Multiple confirmed Soviet spies, all working at Los Alamos, all under the supervision of a man with extensive communist connections. Coincidence? Or something worse? The FBI builds a file. It grows to over 1,000 pages. They wiretap Oppenheimer's phones. They follow him. They interview his colleagues, his students, his friends. They dig into every aspect of his past. And J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, becomes convinced that Oppenheimer is dirty. He can't prove it. There's no smoking gun. But Hoover believes it, and he's determined to bring Oppenheimer down. Now, here's where the story takes its darkest turn. In 1949, the United States government decides to build a hydrogen bomb, a thermonuclear weapon, something exponentially more powerful than the atomic bombs dropped on Japan. The atomic bombs were measured in kilotons, thousands of tons of TNT equivalent. They destroyed cities. A hydrogen bomb would be measured in megatons, millions of tons of TNT equivalent. One bomb could destroy an entire metropolitan area, could kill millions of people in an instant. It was a weapon of genocide, a weapon with no legitimate military purpose except to annihilate entire populations. And J. Robert Oppenheimer opposed it fiercely, publicly, uncompromisingly. He argued it was immoral. He said it would trigger an arms race that would lead to nuclear war. He testified before Congress that the United States should not build it. He used his position on the Atomic Energy Commission's General Advisory Committee to recommend against its development. He lost. President Truman approved the hydrogen bomb program in 1950, but Oppenheimer's opposition was noted, and his enemies began to wonder, why would Oppenheimer oppose a weapon that would keep America ahead of the Soviet Union? Why would he try to prevent the United States from developing its most powerful deterrent? Was it morality, or was it loyalty to the Soviets? Think about it from their perspective. Oppenheimer had communist connections going back decades. Soviet spies had worked under him at Los Alamos. He had lied about the Chevalier affair. And now he was opposing the hydrogen bomb, which would objectively benefit Soviet interests if the United States didn't build it. Edward Teller, the physicist leading the hydrogen bomb program, became convinced that Oppenheimer was either a Soviet sympathizer or worse. Lewis Strauss, the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, believed Oppenheimer was a security risk, and J. Edgar Hoover saw an opportunity to finally destroy a man he had suspected for years. In November 1953, a letter was sent to the FBI. It was from William Borden, who had been the executive director of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, and it said something explosive. More probable than not, J. Robert Oppenheimer is an agent of the Soviet Union. That letter reached President Eisenhower's desk, and everything changed. December 1953, Oppenheimer receives a letter. His security clearance is being suspended. He's being accused of being a security risk. A hearing will be held to determine if his clearance should be permanently revoked. Oppenheimer could have walked away. He could have quietly resigned, kept his position at Princeton, and avoided the public humiliation of a hearing. His friends begged him to do this. They warned him that fighting would be a disaster, that the government would destroy him, that he couldn't win. But Oppenheimer refused. He believed he had done nothing wrong. He believed his loyalty was beyond question. He thought that if he could present his case, if he could explain his actions, he would be vindicated. He was wrong. The hearing began in April 1954, and from the start, it was rigged. The hearing board had access to FBI files and classified information that Oppenheimer's lawyers weren't allowed to see. His conversations with his legal team were being monitored. The government knew his defense strategy before he presented it. The charges were laid out: communist associations, the Chevalier affair, opposition to the hydrogen bomb, relationships with people who turned out to be spies, a pattern of behavior that suggested he couldn't be trusted. Oppenheimer's defense tried to fight back. They called witnesses who testified to his loyalty. They explained his communist sympathies as youthful idealism that he had outgrown. They argued that his opposition to the hydrogen bomb was based on legitimate moral concerns. But the prosecution was relentless. They tore apart every explanation. They pointed out contradictions in his stories. They suggested that his actions, regardless of his motivations, had objectively helped Soviet interests. And then they called Edward Teller. Teller had worked with Oppenheimer at Los Alamos. He had been a colleague and, at one time, something close to a friend. But their relationship had soured over the hydrogen bomb. Teller was now Oppenheimer's enemy. The question was simple. Do you trust J. Robert Oppenheimer with nuclear secrets? Teller's answer destroyed Oppenheimer. He said he wanted to see America's nuclear secrets in hands he understood better and trusted more. He said Oppenheimer's actions had been, to him, confusing and complicated. He wouldn't say Oppenheimer was disloyal, but he wouldn't say he trusted him either. Coming from a fellow scientist, someone who had worked closely with him, it was devastating. If Edward Teller couldn't vouch for Oppenheimer's loyalty, who could? The hearing dragged on for weeks. Oppenheimer was exhausted, humiliated, broken. He watched as his life's work was dissected, his friendships were questioned, his loyalty was destroyed. In June 1954, the verdict came down. By a vote of 4-1, Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked. The man who had built the atomic bomb was now deemed too dangerous to be trusted with nuclear secrets. It was a death sentence for his career, not literally, but professionally. He was finished. His influence was gone. His reputation was destroyed. And here's the truly evil part. The hearing had concluded that while they didn't believe Oppenheimer was disloyal, he was a security risk because of his associations and his judgment. They didn't call him a traitor. They didn't accuse him of spying. They just destroyed him anyway. It was McCarthyism at its finest. Destroy a man's life without actually proving he did anything wrong. Just raise enough doubt, ask enough questions, and let paranoia do the rest. But here's what keeps me up at night. What if they were right? Not about Oppenheimer being a formal Soviet agent. The evidence for that has never materialized. But what if he did share information? What if, in the 1930s or 1940s, before the Cold War made such things unthinkable, he passed along technical details or strategic information because he believed it was the right thing to do? Think about it. Oppenheimer was brilliant but naive about politics. He genuinely believed that nuclear weapons were too dangerous for any one nation to control. He thought that balance of power, with both the U.S. and USSR having the bomb, would prevent nuclear war. What if he acted on those beliefs? What if he, directly or through intermediaries, shared information with Soviet contacts because he thought it would create stability? He wouldn't have seen it as treason. He would have seen it as preventing catastrophe, as ensuring that no single nation could use nuclear weapons without fear of retaliation. But from the government's perspective, it would be espionage. It would be betrayal, even if the motivations were idealistic. This is speculation, of course. We don't have proof. But it would explain so much why he lied about the Chevalier affair, because he was protecting not just Chevalier, but himself from scrutiny about what he might have discussed in similar conversations. Why Soviet archives reference a high-level American source whose identity remains ambiguous. Why he opposed the hydrogen bomb so fiercely because he knew that escalation would make his dream of nuclear balance impossible. It would explain why files remain classified, why the government never formally accused him of espionage but destroyed him anyway, why his story has never fully made sense. Because the truth is more complicated than either loyal patriot or Soviet spy. The truth is that Oppenheimer may have done something that was both idealistic and treasonous, both morally motivated and legally indefensible. And we may never know for certain. Let me tell you about the final years of J. Robert Oppenheimer's life, because they're heartbreaking. After his security clearance was revoked, he retreated into academic life. He remained director of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. He taught. He mentored students. He gave lectures on physics and philosophy. But the fire was gone. Colleagues who had known him before the hearing said he had changed completely. The charisma, the energy, the brilliance that had defined him, it was extinguished. He became quiet, withdrawn, hollow. He smoked constantly, pack after pack of cigarettes. His health deteriorated. He looked older than his years, worn down by stress and regret. In private, he was tormented, not by questions about his loyalty. He always maintained he had been loyal, but by the bomb itself, by what he had created. He watched the arms race accelerate. The United States and Soviet Union built thousands of nuclear weapons. Hydrogen bombs with yields of multiple megatons were tested. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction became policy. Humanity possessed the power to destroy itself many times over. And Oppenheimer knew he was responsible. He had opened that door. He had started the chain reaction that led to all of this. And he spent every day wondering if it could ever be stopped. In 1963, President Lyndon Johnson tried to rehabilitate his reputation by awarding him the Enrico Fermi Award. Oppenheimer accepted. He shook hands with Edward Teller, who had also been invited. Cameras captured the moment. Two men who had destroyed each other, forced to smile for the press. But Oppenheimer's security clearance was never restored. The honor was empty. A gesture, nothing more. In 1965, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. The decades of smoking had caught up with him. He underwent treatment, but the cancer was aggressive. By 1966, he knew he was dying. He spent his final months at his home in Princeton. His wife Kitty was with him. His children visited. He put his affairs in order and waited for the end. On February 18, 1967, J. Robert Oppenheimer died. He was 62 years old, exhausted, broken, carrying secrets he would never reveal. His funeral was attended by some of the greatest physicists of his generation. They remembered him as a brilliant scientist, a visionary leader, a man who had changed history. But even in death, the questions followed him. Was he loyal? Was he a spy? What really happened during those years? What secrets did he take to his grave? We still don't know. Here's what haunts me about this story. In 2022, the Department of Energy announced they were reviewing Oppenheimer's case. They acknowledged that the 1954 hearing had serious procedural flaws, that he had been denied access to evidence, that his legal conversations had been monitored, that the process had been fundamentally unfair. In December 2022, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm vacated the decision to revoke Oppenheimer's security clearance. She said he had been treated unjustly. It was a symbolic acknowledgement that he had been wronged. But here's the thing. They didn't declare him innocent. They just said the process was unfair. They cleared the procedure, not the man. Why? If Oppenheimer was completely innocent, why not say so? Why leave ambiguity? And why are files still classified? It's been 80 years. Everyone involved is dead. What are they still hiding? In 2024, researchers requested the full FBI file on Oppenheimer under the Freedom of Information Act. They wanted to see everything, all 1,000+ pages. The FBI released some documents, but large sections were redacted, entire pages blacked out. They cited national security concerns. National security concerns in 2024 about events from the 1940s and 1950s, about a man who died in 1967. What could possibly still be classified that would threaten national security? Unless there's something in those files that would rewrite history, something that would confirm suspicions that have lingered for decades, something that would prove Oppenheimer was more complicated than hero or villain. That's what terrifies me. The possibility that the truth is sitting in a file cabinet somewhere, classified, hidden, protected, and we may never be allowed to see it. Let me tell you what I think happened. And this is speculation, but it's informed speculation based on everything we know. I think Oppenheimer, in the 1930s and early 1940s, was approached by Soviet intelligence, maybe through Jean Tatlock, maybe through another communist associate, and I think he had conversations where information was discussed, not formal espionage, not dead drops and coded messages, but conversations where he shared technical details or strategic information because he believed cooperation would prevent war. I think those conversations haunted him. I think that's why he lied about the Chevalier affair, because he was terrified of what a real investigation would uncover. I think that's why he opposed the hydrogen bomb so fiercely, because he was trying to undo what he had started. I think the FBI knew or suspected, but couldn't prove it. That's why they destroyed him administratively rather than prosecuting him. That's why his security clearance was revoked without formal charges of espionage. And I think the files that remain classified contain evidence of those conversations. Not enough to convict him in court, but enough to confirm he crossed lines he shouldn't have crossed. That's why they're still hidden. Because if that information came out, it would complicate one of the most important stories in American history. The father of the atomic bomb, the man who won the war, would be revealed as someone who also helped the enemy, not because he was evil, but because he was idealistic and naive and believed he was preventing catastrophe. It would make him human, flawed, complicated. And history doesn't like complicated. History likes heroes and villains. Oppenheimer doesn't fit either category cleanly. So the files stay classified, the secrets stay hidden, and we're left with questions that may never be answered. J. Robert Oppenheimer died 57 years ago, but his story isn't over because the weapons he created still threaten us. The choices he made still affect us, and the secrets he kept still demand answers. In Russia, there are files that have never been opened, references to American sources that have never been identified, code names that might be Oppenheimer or might be someone else. In the United States, the FBI file on Oppenheimer remains partially classified. Documents are released slowly with heavy redactions. Each release adds context, but never provides complete answers. And somewhere, maybe in a classified government archive, maybe lost to history, there might be evidence that would finally settle this. A document that proves he was innocent, or a document that proves he wasn't. But we may never see it, because some secrets are too dangerous to reveal. Some truths are too complicated to acknowledge. J. Robert Oppenheimer became death, destroyer of worlds. He built a weapon that ended one war and defined the next 50 years. He was celebrated as a hero, then destroyed as a traitor. He lived with secrets that tormented him until his death. And those secrets remain, hidden in classified files, buried in fading memories, protected by governments that don't want certain truths to be known. The mystery of J. Robert Oppenheimer isn't just about whether he was a spy. It's about the price of brilliance, the weight of conscience, the moral complexity of living through impossible times and making impossible choices. We may never know the complete truth, but the questions will haunt us forever, because they're not just about Oppenheimer. They're about all of us, about what we do in his position, about where loyalty ends and conscience begins, about whether some secrets should stay buried or whether truth matters more than comfort. J. Robert Oppenheimer is gone, but his secrets live on, in classified files, in unanswered questions, in the shadows of history, and maybe that's where they'll stay, forever.